Fishing has always been my way of unwinding. There's something about the silence of the water, the gentle rocking of the boat, and the occasional tug on the line that makes all the stress of life fade away. But one evening last summer, that peacefulness shattered into something I still struggle to understand. I was out on Briar Lake, a secluded body of water deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. I'd fished there plenty of times before, and I loved how isolated it was. No boat ramps, no houses, no noisy tourists, just the water, the trees, and me. That night, the lake was particularly still. The water was like a sheet of glass, mirroring the sky's deep purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had been out for hours, catching a few bass here and there, when I noticed something floating near the opposite shore. At first, I thought it was driftwood, but as I squinted, the shape became clearer. It was a man. He was floating face down in the water, completely still. My stomach dropped. I immediately reached for my paddle, steering my kayak toward him as fast as I could. The closer I got, the worse the feeling in my gut became. His clothes were old-fashioned, a flannel shirt and dark trousers, the kind of outfit you'd expect to see in a black and white photo from the 1920s. The lake wasn't that deep, and if someone had drowned, their body should have surfaced long before now. But there he was, floating motionless, as if he had just fallen in minutes ago. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, even though I knew it was pointless. I hesitated before reaching out with my paddle, giving his shoulder a light push. The body rolled over, and I saw his face. Or rather, what was left of it. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't eyes anymore. Just black, empty holes, as if something had scooped them out. His mouth was frozen in a grotesque grin, the skin around his lips cracked and peeling. The worst part? His hand twitched. I nearly dropped the paddle. I told myself it was just the current, that bodies moved in strange ways after being in the water too long. But the air was dead still, and the lake wasn't moving. And then, the man sat up. The motion was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being pulled upright by invisible strings. I barely had time to react before he turned his head toward me, his hollow eye sockets locked onto mine. A guttural, choking sound bubbled up from his throat, and his body lunged toward my kayak, sending water sloshing against the side. I screamed, digging my paddle into the water and pushing off as hard as I could. The kayak rocked violently, and for a moment, I thought I was going to tip over, right into the water with him. But somehow, I stayed upright. I paddled harder than I ever had in my life, my arms burning, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached the shore, my lungs were on fire. I dragged my kayak onto the sand and collapsed beside it, gasping for air. And then, I heard the splashing. I turned my head slowly, my entire body rigid with fear. The lake was still, too still. The floating man was gone. No ripples, no movement, nothing. It was like he had never been there. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring out at the water, waiting for something, anything, to resurface. But the lake remained silent. I don't remember packing up my gear. I don't even remember driving home. All I know is that I never went back to Briar Lake. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about those empty eye sockets. And when I wake up, I swear, I can hear something dripping outside my window. Fishing has always been a big part of my life. My father took me out on the water when I was a kid, and I carried the tradition into adulthood. There's something about sitting on a quiet lake, the world stripped down to just you and the water, that always felt peaceful. But last October, that peace was shattered. I was out on Red Pine Lake, a remote lake in northern Michigan known for its bass fishing. The lake was deep, surrounded by thick forest, and almost always covered in a low mist during the early hours. The fog made the place look eerie, but I loved it. It meant fewer people and more fish. That morning, I set out alone before sunrise, my boat cutting through the still water. The air was cold, and the fog hung thick around me, muffling every sound. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. But I wasn't alone. I had been fishing for maybe an hour when I saw the first ripple. The lake had been perfectly still, the water like glass, until that moment. It started as a small disturbance, just a tiny ripple, but it grew. At first, I thought it was a fish, maybe something big swimming just below the surface. But the way it moved was strange. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was circling me. I tried to ignore it. Probably just a school of fish, I told myself. I cast my line again and tried to focus. Then the smell hit me. It was foul, like rotting fish, and something even worse, something sour and metallic. The air suddenly felt thick, like the mist had weight to it. I gagged, covering my nose. I had fished in some nasty places before, but I had never smelled anything like that. That's when I saw the hand. It was just beneath the water, barely visible through the murky depths. At first, I thought it was some submerged debris, a branch, or a piece of trash. Then it moved. The fingers twitched, flexing as if they were trying to grasp something. I stumbled backward in the boat, my breath catching in my throat. That wasn't a fish. That wasn't debris. That was a human hand. The water around it churned, and before I could react, it disappeared. Yanked down into the depths by something else. The lake went deathly still. The smell was overwhelming now, and the air felt too quiet, like the world had been muffled. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to get back to shore, but I couldn't move. Then I heard it, a voice. It was whispering my name. The sound was low and distorted, like it was coming from underwater. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it surrounded me, seeping into my ears like mist. I gripped the edge of the boat, my knuckles white. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice unsteady. The whispering stopped, and then the boat started rocking. Something huge was moving under me. I could feel it. Not just a fish or a log, but something massive, something shifting beneath the boat, making the water swell unnaturally. Then, slowly, something surfaced. At first, it just looked like a shape in the fog, a long, thin figure rising from the water. Then I saw its face. It wasn't a face that should exist. Its skin was bloated and stretched too tight over its skull, its mouth wide and gaping, frozen in a silent scream. Its eyes were hollow pits, black and endless, staring right at me. And it was smiling. I screamed and grabbed the oar, swinging it wildly. The boat lurched, tilting dangerously, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The thing tilted its head, as if studying me. Then it did something that still haunts me. It reached up, and another hand grabbed the side of my boat. I felt the weight shift, the boat dipping as something tried to climb in. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed the motor's pull cord and yanked as hard as I could. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence. The thing jerked its head back, its expression twisting into something almost angry, and then it slid back into the water. I floored the gas, the boat rocketing toward shore. I expected it to chase me, to feel something grab my ankle or pull me down, but nothing happened. By the time I reached the dock, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely tie the boat off. I collapsed onto the wooden planks, gasping for breath. The lake was still. The fog had lifted, and there was no sign of anything. I never went back to Red Pine Lake. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that my mind had played tricks on me in the mist. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispering again. And once, I swear, I saw the wet handprint on my window. Fishing was always my escape, no matter how chaotic life got. Sitting by the water with my line, cast, and the sounds of nature surrounding me made everything feel manageable. But after what happened at Lake Hollowbend, I don't think I'll ever fish alone again. Lake Hollowbend was a small, isolated lake in Montana, tucked away in the forest where few people ventured. It wasn't a well-known spot. There were no campgrounds, no rental cabins, and no signs pointing you in the right direction. My friend, Eli, had heard about it from an old coworker who claimed it was the best fishing spot no one knew about. It sounded perfect. Remote, quiet, untouched. We packed up our gear, loaded up my small aluminum boat, and made the drive out there, arriving just before sunset. We should have turned back the moment we saw the boat. It was half submerged, floating near the center of the lake. At first, we thought it was abandoned. Maybe some hunter had left it behind, or it had come loose from shore. But as we got closer, something about it felt off. The boat was old, its paint peeling, and its hull was riddled with deep gashes, like something had torn through it. A single fishing rod was still propped against the edge, the line vanishing into the water. And then we saw the life jacket. It was floating a few feet away, bloated and half open, like someone had slipped out of it. Eli and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Think someone's missing?" he asked. I didn't answer. The thought had already crossed my mind, and I didn't like it. The water was deep, and the forest was dense. If someone had gone overboard, finding them would be nearly impossible. "I don't see a name on the boat," Eli said, running his fingers over the worn paint. "But it's been here a while. Should we report it?" I hesitated. The air around us felt too still, like the lake itself was listening. "We should at least check," I said finally, "just to make sure no one's in the water." That was our first mistake. We grabbed a flashlight and leaned over the side, peering into the murky depths. At first, there was nothing, just the shifting darkness of the water. Then, something moved. It was slow, a shape drifting just below the surface. I squinted, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I thought it was a fish, but then I saw it. A hand, pale, motionless, reaching upward. It floated just beneath the abandoned boat, fingers curled, as if it had been trying to grab the edge. Eli gasped, stumbling back. "Jesus, do you see that?" I did, and worse, I saw what was holding it. The hand wasn't attached to anything human. Beneath it, obscured by the shadows, was something else. A mass of twisted limbs, long and thin, like the skeletal remains of something that had been rotting in the water for years. And then it opened its eyes. They weren't normal. They were white and empty, like a fish pulled too deep from the ocean, and they were staring right at me. I yanked the oar out of the boat and slammed it into the water, trying to push us away. The second the wood made contact, the hand snapped upward, grabbing the edge of the boat. The whole thing lurched violently, nearly throwing us both overboard. "Go, go, get us out of here," Eli screamed. I didn't need to be told twice. I fumbled for the motor's pull cord and yanked. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. The boat rocked again, and when I glanced over, the hand was still gripping the side. And worse, another one had surfaced. The fingers dragged along the hull, leaving deep grooves in the aluminum. Beneath the water, more shadows were moving. Shapes, long and thin, twisting in unnatural ways. Then, from the depths, I heard a sound, low, gurgling, like a voice bubbling up from the bottom of the lake. It was whispering my name. I yanked the cord one last time, and the motor roared to life. The hands vanished instantly, retreating into the blackness below. We sped toward shore, the boat skimming the surface so fast I thought we'd flip. I didn't look back. I didn't want to look back. We hit the shore hard, nearly running the boat up onto the land. I jumped out, my legs shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. Eli was already ahead of me, hauling our gear out like his life depended on it. We didn't speak. We didn't pack up properly. We just left. Later, I checked the news. There had been no missing person reports near Hollow Bend Lake. No abandoned boats. No one else had seen anything. I started to think maybe it had been a hallucination, just the stress of the moment playing tricks on us. Until a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside my window. A low, gurgling whisper. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, closer this time, and when I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, there was a wet handprint on the glass. I haven't been fishing since, because I know, deep down, that whatever was in that lake that night, it followed me home. Fishing has always been a passion of mine. There's something about the quiet isolation of a lake, the rhythmic cast of a line, the feeling of being completely untethered from the world. But what happened last September on Black Hollow Lake made me realize that some places are not meant to be fished. Black Hollow was a lake I had only heard whispers about. It was deep in the wilderness of Oregon, surrounded by dense pines and steep cliffs. No docks, no campsites, just a narrow dirt path leading to a clearing by the water. I had planned the trip with my cousin, Mark, but at the last minute, he bailed. I wasn't thrilled about going alone, but I had driven 5 hours to get there, and I wasn't about to turn back. That was my first mistake. The lake was unnervingly still when I arrived. No birds, no insects, just silence. Thick fog clung to the surface of the water, curling around the trees like something alive. It should have been peaceful, but instead, the air felt heavy, like the whole place was holding its breath. I ignored the unease creeping up my spine and pushed my boat into the water. I paddled out toward the center of the lake, the mist swirling around me. It was strange. Usually, fog lifts as the sun rises, but here, it only seemed to get thicker. I cast my line and waited. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a boat. It was barely visible through the fog, just a dark shape drifting in the distance. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe I wasn't alone out here after all. But something about the boat felt wrong. It wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, perfectly still. And as the fog shifted, I saw the outline of a figure inside. A fisherman, hunched over, gripping a rod. I waved. "Hey, any luck out here?" No response. He didn't even flinch, just kept sitting there, motionless. The hairs on my arms stood up. There was something off about the way he was positioned, like he wasn't actually fishing, just waiting. I told myself he was probably just an old-timer, lost in thought. I turned my attention back to my own line, focusing on the water. Then, a splash. Loud, like something huge had just broken the surface. I whipped around. The fisherman was gone. His boat was still there, bobbing gently in the water. But he wasn't in it. I stared at the empty seat, my breath catching in my throat. No ripples. No sign of movement. Just gone. Then, the fog shifted again, and I saw him, standing on the water. About 20 feet away, the fisherman was standing upright, his feet on the surface like it was solid ground. His body was rigid, his head tilted slightly. His eyes, if he had any, were hidden under the shadow of his tattered hat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, he pointed at me. I panicked. I yanked my line in, the reel screeching as I fought against whatever had taken the bait. But I never saw a fish, because when I pulled the line up, there was a hook lodged in my own shirt. My own hook, as if I had been the one caught. I ripped it away, my hands shaking, my mind screaming at me to leave. But when I looked up, the fisherman was gone. I didn't stop to question it. I rowed faster than I ever had in my life, my arms burning as I cut through the fog. I half expected to feel a hand grab my ankle, to see that figure standing on the shore, waiting. But when I reached the clearing, the fog suddenly lifted, and the lake looked normal, like nothing had ever happened. I dragged my boat onto the shore and didn't look back. By the time I reached my truck, my body felt numb, like I had barely survived something I wasn't meant to witness. As I peeled out onto the dirt road, my heart still hammering in my chest, I stole one last glance at the lake, and that's when I saw it. The boat was gone. The empty boat that had been drifting in the water all morning was nowhere to be seen. But on the shoreline, standing perfectly still, was the fisherman. He was watching me leave. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't want to know. But I'll tell you this, there are places in this world we aren't supposed to fish. Because sometimes, something else is doing the fishing. And it's waiting for you.